16-year-old self and think if I went back in time and told her that this is where I was now, she wouldn't believe me. There's no way she'd believe me. I don't think she thought she would ever get past the age of 40 or even 30 at that stage. So I think she'd be quite blown away about the journey that we've taken from young to old and all the bumps.
So I'm in here today with Taimi Allan, who is the Cinderella of mental health for me. She is extraordinary. I got to meet her in person last year in Canada. She's the South Australian Mental Health Commissioner, but she has quite a story that I'm going to really enjoy sharing with you. Welcome, Taimi. How are you?
It's good to be here.
It's so nice to just chat away with you. And I was really looking forward to just being able to share you with people, because I think I always come across these amazing people, and I think of you as one of my favorite people to sit and speak to and listen to, because whenever you say something, it's so real. And have a cup of coffee with. Exactly. But then I think, well, I don't want to hang on to these amazing people just for myself. And I'm always about sharing. And I think one of the things about you that I have absolutely loved is your realism, and it just oozes from you. And yet you have this quiet power. And the reason I refer to you as the Cinderella of mental health is because you came from lived experience through this journey of professionalism. And you're currently the Commissioner for South Australian Mental Health. Tell our listeners about your journey.
Well, I often think back to my 15 or 16-year-old self and think if I went back in time and told her that this is where I was now, she wouldn't believe me. There's no way she'd believe me. I don't think she thought she would ever get past the age of 40 or even 30 at that stage. So I think she'd be quite blown away about the journey that we've taken from young to old and all the bumps in between. But yeah, I mean, where do you start on a journey like mine? I think, the nutshell I tell people when they say, what are your qualifications for doing this work? I say, well, I went mad and then I got better. But of course, that's a bit of a very short snippet of what that story felt like. And I think my experiences from a very young person who had feelings that I felt always like I'd grown up without any skin on. Everything hurt so deeply and felt so raw, and so I wasn't in control of my feelings or really understood where they were coming from. I didn't have an unhappy upbringing. My parents, I still, they're still here in Adelaide and they get on really well with me. But I think we all wear, I guess, the traumas of their past as well. So that generational trauma that goes through our parents and our parents' parents, and that kind of, you learn how to cope or not to cope in maybe certain not healthy ways. So yeah, I think between the ages of 15 and 30, I do a bit of a countdown. So I had, a lot of different inpatient admissions. I was diagnosed with 9 different disorders, from the DSM, and was on about 10 different medications. Spent 6 months or more in about 5 different hospitals. I had 7 courses of ECT. I went through 2 addictions, which was really just a way of trying to numb some of that pain that I thought that I felt. And there wasn't really an epiphany for me of the things that healed me, other than the system didn't work for me. Every time I went into a doctor, they would diagnose me with something else, and they would give me another pill, and they'd put me in hospital, and they'd tell me that this is the way you're going to be for the rest of your life, and you'll probably never hold down a job or have a relationship. And actually, even at that time, I thought, well, that can't be true, because every job I've even had since the age of 14 or 15, they never knew that the struggles that I was going through. And I always did really well at work. In fact, that was my solace, really, to be at work and work really hard and put my head down and do the very best I could. I think I had a really strong work ethic from an early age. But I was very secretive about what was going on behind the scenes and underneath the surface and at home. So, yeah, it was a bit of a roller coaster, really.
I think, you put that so beautifully and well, because mental health isn't an epiphany moment. It's just part of how you're feeling. And when you said, and, it's like walking around without skin on, I think that's something that every single young person, every single human being can identify with. Things at a certain point in your life or a certain time, chemically, your balance can go out. And you're not going stark raving mad. Your skin's not on. Somehow everything hurts more. Somehow you wore out the entire muscle of your nervous system and everything is so raw. And so at that particular time, you become very good at masking it, which I think, is something we teach our kids, our society. You go to work and you want to be, you act it out, like it's fake it till you make it. But what you've just said can be so powerful for every single young person or person listening to this, because look at you. You are the Cinderella of mental health. And in effect, you then light up and illuminate it's okay. Again, for us to hear it over and over and over again, it's okay to be not okay. For a little while, you're not okay. It is a chapter. It's not your story. And,
it's one of the biggest things that I had to learn. I had to learn that just because I'm not okay doesn't mean I'm not always going to be not okay. Do you know what I mean? I think those moments where I felt really like, what am I even doing here? And I was the lowest of possible. Those moments felt like they were going to last forever. But in the course of a lifetime, really, those moments are so short. The older you get and the more tools that you get, and I'm still learning every day. I mean, I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was 40. And that was a big eye-opening, because I thought all that rejection sensitivity I had and all that needing to push against the system and the people, that was just part of who I was, and that could actually be a superpower. But I think feeling rejected all the time, even if that didn't exist, was probably ADHD, not all the other things I was diagnosed with. So I guess that's the only mark in the textbook that I hold on to as a good thing, and all the other diagnoses that I've had, I've let go of, because I don't think they really apply to me anymore. I've moved through them and I've learnt from them, and I think that I'm a stronger person, and I think I'm probably quite a nicer person because of having to go through that and meet a lot of people on that same journey.
What a beautiful way of putting it, because you went through something that enabled you to feel what you are relating to every single day. The importance of what you're saying is that recovery isn't what it's about. It's about empowerment, not the illness. And it's not even an illness, it's a moment, because that time that you went through, as you've beautifully described, is just that time. It doesn't define you. But if we rethink this a little bit, one of the things that really caught me that you just said, the hardest part, I think, for anybody in our society is we've got this beautifully connected social network through everything digital in the world, and yet isolation is huge. And when you are different, or you're going through something that feels like someone's shone a great big looking glass on you and you are being examined or looked at or pointed at, suddenly it's like not being accepted, not being supported is another point of pain. So it's again just moving away from that.
There's some of the not feeling supported doesn't necessarily mean that you're not. It just, for me at least, meant that maybe I wasn't sure enough or brave enough to know what would happen if I did reach out and ask for support. And that happens even now. So I'm not saying that my life is perfect now. I have really good days mostly, and then occasionally I have a really bad day. I just know who my safe people are to tell that today's a bad day. And my safe people are ones that can hold on to that for me, not go into panic mode, not call the police or the ambulance, just say, what do you need right now to keep yourself safe for the next 20 minutes, half an hour, 24 hours? And then have that conversation with me, because my natural inclination when I'm in those moods is to go and hide under the doona and sit in the bottom of the shower and actually not engage with the world. So those really safe people for me know that when I stop engaging with the world, that's when to reach into me rather than expect me to reach out. And I think maybe as a society, we need to be a little bit better at that, because it's really hard to reach out and ask for help when you're at your lowest. You don't know how that help's going to come or how people are going to react.
You know, like how refreshing. It's like having this beautiful mountain stream that you sit beside when I listen to you, because this is the gentleness of life. That sometimes you need something really gentle. Sometimes you need a couple of rocks around you to guide where you're going to flow, so that you can go out there and you can flow really well again. And it's not about anything other than knowing who those rocks are, and knowing that when you're weathering a storm, you need to know where you can shelter. It's, you know, the art of storytelling in our society has been a tribal kind of, you know, part of our village systems, part of how we've grown as communities. More and more as we become socially, technically connected, and we're both part of EMIC, and how powerful that world of e-mental health is. But then again, we've got to find ways to commune in storytelling. And storytelling is the power of the narrative, which is where we say, you know, I learnt from, this is how it is. And so we can develop all these great systems, but it's so very important to be community-based even through this technological era, so that stories like yours are about a community. They're about, hey, we all go and this is the power of storytelling. Hey, the narrative that's there around mental health that really needs to be even more powerfully there as technology becomes our way of connecting.
You're absolutely right. And I'm very passionate about, well, I say using your story, not telling your story. And I think there's a big difference between the two, because storytelling is the only thing that people can hold on to and remember. I can stand up and tell you a whole lot of stats and figures and charts and graphs and things like that, and you're going to walk away not remembering a thing I said. But if I talk to you about someone who's gone through that journey and what that journey looks like, that's the thing that's going to stick to you. And so I use different types of storytelling in a lot of the work that I do. And I come from that, you know, the arts industries, film, TV, theatre, that sort of stuff. And so I use a lot of that understanding in my work, and I call it edutainment, because I think that people don't want to go and hear the Mental Health Commissioner speak or advocates speak. They want to go and be entertained. But if we can somehow get messages in that entertainment that helps people change their minds, their attitudes, their behaviours, the way they support themselves and others, then we've done our job, and we've done our job well. And storytelling is a big part of that. When I teach people about storytelling, there are people I know who will never get out there and tell their story, and I wouldn't want them to, because they might be in jobs or in parts of society of which telling their story would be really dangerous for them to do. And I'm talking about, I've worked with pilots and politicians and journalists and risk industries, so to speak. And those people will say to me, gosh, if I said out loud at work that this was my experience, then I would not have a job anymore. So what I then try and do is, how then can we use our stories? You know, how as a journalist can you use other people's stories to bring light to it, knowing that you've got your own experience that makes sure that those stories are going to be really compelling and changing? And how do you, as a politician, use your story and gather other stories that are similar to try and make a policy change? How do you, as a pilot, put in things for the rest of your staff and other peers to say, how do we make sure we look after ourselves on really long flights when we're away from our families and we're doing strange hours, you know? So using your story is understanding what is it about the experience that I've had in the places that I have influence that require me to change those things, because I can't walk into a footy club or a rugby club and tell a whole lot of blokes what it is that they should be doing for their mental health. But what I can do is support one or two of those people that are already in those clubs to go, what are the messages that you reckon you could influence the way that that culture works? And I think that that has always done me really well, because that's a little bit like being a director on a film set. You're helping shape the story, but you're not necessarily, the main character. I think that works a lot better.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I could listen to you for hours. You've had such a journey, and I think everything you're saying is something I 100%, can identify and agree with. And I think it also is those droplets of leadership. And I like to think about the Daily Dose as a place where people are getting those drops of anything but chemicals that helps their get going chemicals and self-acceptance chemicals start again. Because creating our chemistry actually, I really truly believe, comes from human connection. And human connection is the narrative and the comfort that can change so many things. It's the first thing we go looking for when we are born into the world. We go looking for connection. And this is what helps us to thrive. So, to me, everything you're talking about is life itself, but it's also leadership. So life and leadership, I often will say to people, it's available to everyone. Leading yourself is the most important thing that you can do. You don't need a title to do that. It's just about getting to a place where you're comfortable. And I've got to say, Taimi, that's what makes you such an exceptional leader, is because you're so raw, real, but also there's no ego in it. I've never seen that seat from you. I've just seen you, again, allowing people the space to to just know you, which I think is incredible. And I think it's the courage and kindness, which I think are the formidable traits that we all need to hold. And you have that in abundance. And so this story, well, you've got to...
really amazing lessons from really good leaders. I mean, I worked in New Zealand for 20 years and loved being on that journey there. And one of the leaders that I learnt from, we all know, in Jacinda Ardern, in the way that she led with kindness through the COVID pandemic and the horrible atrocities that happened during her term. And I saw her once speak when we were in kind of a parliamentary thing, and she was speaking, and I heard her say just quietly to a few people around her that she had imposter syndrome. And I think apparently she talks about that in her book, which I haven't read yet. But I remember thinking, gosh, if she has imposter syndrome and she can still lead with such kindness and strength, then I can too. I can have imposter syndrome, because I'm always questioning myself how the hell I got to these places and mix in these spaces and people are listening to me. I've never quite understood that, but I had a bit of an awakening a few years ago when I started having real gratitude for imposter syndrome, because I think ultimately imposter syndrome is one of those things that has you questioning whether you're still learning at every step. And I worry that if you don't have imposter syndrome, then it means you might stop learning, and probably you're a narcissist because you think everything that you do is great. But imposter syndrome is one of those things that makes me stop and go, do I deserve to be here? Am I actually making a difference? Am I actually supporting people? And it keeps me real. And I think the other really great leader I learnt from was a guy called Jim Burdett, who led the first mental health company that I was involved in 20 odd years ago, longer than that. And I came in, it was the first time I'd ever used my lived experience as one of the qualifications to do my job. And he said to me, and I remember I actually had it printed on a t-shirt. He said, you are enabled by your experience, not disabled by it. And I was in a play at the moment playing a woman who was very depressed. And that's when he said it to me. He said, you couldn't have played that woman if you hadn't experienced that yourself. And so therefore you're enabled, not disabled. And so I carry that around with me, that the experiences you're given in life should be enabling. They should never be disabling. And if they are, it's about you haven't yet moved through it enough to be able to look back on it and work out what you've learned from that.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And if you look at reform and mental health reform, then community solutions that are embracing lived experience have become so very important. And that kind of leads me a little bit to, where do you see the place of storytelling, education, in reform, and also in technology and inclusion now?
Having been the beneficiary of lots of lived wisdom from all over the world, I think that in Australia we're still slightly at the infancy of lived experience leadership. So in New Zealand, I was able to kind of move into many dedicated lived experience roles that started with, consumer advisory and peer support, and then moved into team leader and manager and comms managers, and then eventually commissioner and CEO territory. And all of those were lived experience dedicated roles. And yet in Australia, those are very few and far between unless you're talking about peer support. So we still have quite a way to go to help people step up their skills, talents, and experiences into more and more leadership roles. And secondly, for our society to understand that that's actually a benefit to society. It's not a risk. We're still very conservative and risk averse when it comes to peer roles and lived experience roles. But one thing I keep reminding the system every single day when we talk about lived experience roles is people weren't born having lived experience. People often had whole lives and careers before whatever it was that railroaded their life and helped them gain that lived experience or lived wisdom. And what we do when we employ someone into a job with lived experience, we say, just come with that. Just come with your lived experience. That is your entire qualifications to do your job. And we forget they've run small businesses, they've had families, they've been parents, they've gone through other systems that would really benefit. They've been accountants or lawyers, and yet we ask them to drop all that and then come in and just be a peer support worker. And I think we need to get better at going, what skills do you bring? Lived experience is a bonus to that, not the other way around.
It's fascinating. I was watching a little bit of the news coming in from Melbourne around the crisis of care there, and thinking about, so many people waiting hours, days, 92 hours in some instances, or longer, for mental health treatment. And I just wonder, what are the successes that you've seen in Adelaide in moving away from a hospital care system to a how can we care for people in our community, as opposed to that last resort?
I've seen lots of really great models all over the world. I mean, starting in Adelaide, and some of these models are in other states as well. I love the just listening space that has been set up for those feeling suicidal and who hear voices and have other experiences of psychosis. And it's just a space where people are accepted with whatever reality they're coming in at the moment, and they're listened to. And that's run privately. They don't get any government funding, which to me is a bit of a shame. I would like to see that change. But once again, it's because of risk. So private investors that have actually used, or their family have used the service and find it really valuable, are the ones investing in that. There's also the safe havens, which are run more like a lounge room or a cafe, where peer support workers are first and foremost the people that look after you and walk alongside you. And then we've got the Urgent Mental Health Care Centre in Adelaide, which I think is just a fabulous service. And it really is, I said to my husband when I first got here, I drove him around the city and I said, if I'm ever unwell again, this is where you take me. Please don't take me to the hospital. Please bring me here, because I know when I walk in the door, the first person to greet me will be someone, a peer support worker, and they will get it. They will understand immediately what I'm going through. And yet I've been in emergency departments, in fact, quite recently in the last few weeks, where I've seen someone pace the halls because they've been waiting 36 hours and they're brought in by an ambulance, and all they wanted was to see the mental health team, and they're triaged down the list because someone else is having a heart attack and someone's got a broken leg. And I think all that would need is to someone, anyone, a peer support worker or anyone really, just a human being, to come and sit down next to that person and go, hey, do you want to talk about it? It could have been diffused so easily, and yet what ends up happening, and certainly what I witnessed happening in sitting in the emergency room, was that after so many hours of pacing and getting escalated because he wasn't getting the support he needed, he was surrounded by security guards, and that makes everything worse. So
Yeah. No,
I'd
it
like to
hasn't.
see that we broaden our workforce, right? Like, we don't need doctors and psychiatrists for everything. And psychiatrists say themselves that they want to be working at the top of their scope. They want to be working on cases where their skills and their knowledge are really, really valuable. And so we should be able to provide a much wider cultural workforce, lived experience workforce that people can trust to go and see when things start to get wobbly, not when the proverbial fodder has hit the rotating blades, right? Like, let's get in there early with people who are taught to be human.
It's really interesting. It hasn't, I hate to say it hasn't changed that much in 30 years, but I remember going from Paremaremu to some of the clinics and community to a lot of the maximum care facilities. I mean, quite often in Paremaremu in New Zealand, we used to have people who were sent to us who really didn't belong in a prison, but there was just nowhere else to keep them, and then you look at the Mason Clinic as well, and kind of things become crime after they have deteriorated, and quite often it's that kind of slippery slope that goes from I'm feeling isolated and alone, there's stuff going on that I can't deal with, I'm not wearing my skin today, to now everyone's exacerbating it and I'm being pointed at and I feel lonely, and then I'm hungry and I can't do things for myself because I'm not functioning that well and I don't have those safe people. And then you go to a place that should be a safe place and you're treated as an unsafe person. So it's kind of like the whole thing confounds itself, and you run in that figure eight from what should be a high functioning system into a low functioning environment that then exacerbates the anger, deterioration, arguing, yelling, substances, and it just goes around and becomes, and then you use substances to calm the client when maybe it could have been a cognitive behavioral intervention. It could have been quite straightforward at a less exacerbated time.
Fatigue. Yeah.
It could have been fatigue. It could have been anything, but the absolute key to all of it is, and I used to say in those days, wouldn't it be nice if hospitals had a listening zone or a listening cafe where you could arrive, and if you couldn't, you just had stuff going on, you could go in there and chat to someone, much like the book exchanges. And I think, I still think it would be a great system, because I also think that the people who are perhaps waiting for loved ones who are in critical care might just need to go chat with someone. So,
around the world that are doing that. So there are safe havens inside hospitals, or, peer support cafes. There's an amazing alternative to inpatient hospital in New Zealand up north called Piripono, and that's run entirely by peers. So you go into a hospital environment, but it's they have sheep, it's out on a farm, and it's more like living in a house with some flatmates that really care about you for that short amount of time that you would otherwise be in hospital. And there's some places that do that really well, but they're really few and far between. And it feels sad, because it's kind of a no-brainer when it comes to stopping escalation, for sure.
I know one of my peers wrote a book, Don't Ever Grow Up, and I often say to people, when I fell in love with mental health, I didn't even really know I was going to. I was going to be a surgeon at one point in time, an orthopedic surgeon, so I was really fascinated by orthopedics. And I remember when I was 14 years old, I won a ticket to a stress management weekend from a Lions function. And I landed it this weekend. My parents in their wisdom said, no, you should do this. I'm like, what am I going to be like, And I went along to it, and there was nothing but men in the room, all businessmen. There were no business women in those days, it seemed. And I went into that room, and I remember at the end of 2 days of going to this stress management workshop, they were all turning around to me, thank you for being here. Thank you for reminding us that we're all still 14 inside. And I just gave very honest reflections about things. And it stuck with me when I left. I thought, wow, you can do so much through conversation and through changing things. And I began my journey of falling in love with sight, thinking actually maybe this is how I go and I make a difference in the world. Because again, it's that conversation. And I think that this is something we truthfully forget. Like we get, you go womb to tomb and you don't really kind of have anything when you come into the world. You leave with nothing. What you do in between counts. But we seem to dress it up a lot of the time in a lot of great, fantastic things when actually all it is raw and real, just exactly as you put it. It's raw
But
and
also
real.
there's levels of conversations and levels of trust, particularly in mental health. So, one of my experiences is that I have, three voices that live inside my head and they talk to me. One, I've renamed them based on what, my relationship with them and whether I respect them or not. And one of them I've renamed Trump because everything he says is fake news. And the other two are Tweedledee and Tweedledum because they're just constantly arguing with each other. So renaming them has allowed me to kind of distance themselves from me and kind of recognize them for what they are, which are just critics. And so, I think back at my time and, in my early days of engaging in mental health services, there is no way I would ever have told any of my doctors that these three critics live inside my head and they're talking to me. I just wouldn't have, because I wouldn't have been able to trust that they wouldn't have done something with that information that would restrict my movements and restrict my human rights. So I never told any of them. And yet when I moved in peer support circles and I learned that other people had this experience called hearing voices, and actually that they had different ways of laughing about it, different ways of dealing with it, different ways of coping with it. And some found their voices really supportive. Most found them really unsupportive and distressing. But everyone was able to talk about them really openly in peer support groups that would never be able to be talked about openly, even in my family. They weren't, if I told my friends, they would get really worried about what did that mean. People had heard all sorts of strange and crazy stories about, mad people that had gone off the deep ends and were talking to themselves. And I thought, well, that's not my experience. But if I tell people that this is what one of my experiences, then they're going to make all these sorts of judgment calls on it. So there's these kind of levels of conversations that are safe for people. And if you are one of those people that someone comes out and tells their story to, then that you should have a lot of pride that someone has trusted you enough to tell you that that's part of their experience, because there are many places in their life that they wouldn't have been able to tell you that. And I think we need to kind of understand that we may not always hear a whole person's story because they've got to trust where it's safe to tell that. And I think that's why we have amazing cultural leaders and amazing spiritual leaders and amazing peer leaders, because those are the safe places that will hold those stories and those whole experiences and not make any judgment calls on that, nor have any power, really, to lock you up and throw away the key, which is what we're all afraid of.
It's an incredible statement right there, I think, and that's the hardest part for any of the spectrums of mental health. Whether you are feeling anxious or depressed and you're a top sports person, whether you're in school and you're having ideation or thoughts of it's too much, or you're walking that tightrope of feeling isolated and alone because you feel your differences exclude you, or you're going under life pressures, or you're sitting at different extremes. All of those situations are about the loss of power. And then that becomes exacerbated if somebody else comes in and says, well, we're going to take your power away from you fully. And that just makes everything so much worse. Taimi, I just honestly, I listen to you and I feel like people should spend time listening to this over and over and over again, because your permission giving language, your capacity to say, this is who I really am. And you are a
It's all
commissioner.
normal.
It is all normal. It normalizes experience and humanity and takes away all the labels, which unfortunately, seem to be pushing at everything in our society, especially our young. And there's just so much pain there. If I were to ask you, what's the legacy that you aspire to or hope to having? Because, mental health carries all these horrible labels, all these things that are scary, and they get thrown at people every day, and life's difficulties seem to be this point of frailty. What would you seek to change about, the tenure of mental health, and perhaps even the treatment of people in your position?
Well, I mean, there's that favourite that favourite saying of mine: "The only thing constant is change itself," isn't it? So, I think that the change that I would want to see was that everybody in society knowing that change is not only possible but probable for most people who go through really extreme experiences. And I think we've shifted the needle a lot on things like depression and anxiety and postnatal depression and things like that many people who have had either some personal experience or know someone has had. But we haven't shifted the needle very much on what we would call more extreme experiences or differing realities. And I would like people to understand those just as much as they understand any other part of life where things have got in the way of you flourishing. And one of the things I've learned a lot from spending a lot of time with people with differing realities is just how amazing our brain is. Because in the midst of in some stories that I've been privileged to hear, such extreme trauma and pain, our brains have found ways through. They have found personas to protect you from the ugliness of what you're experiencing, or voices to be your cheerleaders or keep you safe, or ways of not leaving the house if there's danger outside. And our brains are really good at rewiring itself to do that. And yet we see that somehow as an illness that needs to be fixed. And what I really want society to see is that nobody has these experiences without really good reason for them, without a really, you speak to anyone and you find out their whole story. And if they trust you with their story, the one thing that always strikes me is, of course you have that experience. Of course you feel the way you do, because anyone would feel the way you do if you've gone through what you have gone through. And I want everyone to kind of have that epiphany that not only are these experiences not scary and frightening, but that no matter where you are in society, what job you do, what position you hold, what influence you have the ability to sit down and understand those experiences without prejudice and not discriminate against someone, but to sit down and listen and have the confidence to know what to do or say next, even if that is nothing. Even if just sitting and going, Grouchy, that sounds so hard. I have no idea what to say to you right now, other than maybe we just sit with that for a bit. And I think that we're so afraid of doing the wrong thing. We often do nothing. We often say nothing. Whereas most people don't want you to fix them. Most people just want you to sit with them and hear them. And I think our biomedical model wants to sit with you, hear you, and then fix you. And in some cases, that's not possible without a whole lot of other life experiences and ways to build your own toolbox. No one can fix you. We just have to build the things that work for us. And they're going to look really different for every single person. But we need people around us to understand that we're building that toolbox, and that you don't have to fix me, but maybe listening to me and throwing some suggestions of things I might try might be something that would be beneficial, and not have the fear to do that. So, if you're a barber or a cafe owner or a journo or whatever you are in your work, just knowing that you've got the confidence to do something different and not react.
The most profound
legacy. It feels too naff to be a legacy, but yeah, I just want people to be human and kind, really, and then they'll understand that things aren't so scary.
I think it's not just a statement. I think it is a legacy maker, and I think Again, all I'll say is that the importance of everything that you're saying is permission giving. You're giving the rite of passage back to the person, the respect. And so often what goes wrong in our society is we don't just say, hey, I really don't know how that experience really feels, but I just want to be here for you. Do you want me just to sit here and be here right now? Is it okay if I'm here? And I'm just going to be here, and just tell me if there's something you need. It's again just asking the permission, giving the dignity back. And I think the one thing I feel in everything that you've said is how beautifully your words capture the dignity of humanity and the dignity of frailty in those moments. And it's just a moment, right? But that dignity, you're giving it respect.
Yeah. There's a proviso that comes with that too, because a lot of people say to me, yeah, I want to be able to do with that, but they're so needy and they'll want me all the time and I don't have the capacity to do that. And I think that people with lived experience are really good at respecting people's boundaries. If I've opened up to you and you've said, I don't know how that feels and I want to sit with you for a bit, I also know that it's okay for you to go, I can't sit with this weekend. It's too much for me, because that's showing me how boundaries work, and that's showing me that I can put my own boundaries up as well. So I think it's okay to say when you do and don't have capacity to sit with someone as they're going through something, because families do it really hard. And if they're supporting someone all the time, they need a break too.
Yeah, they certainly do. Technology, inclusion, these are all big
We haven't even
things.
talked about tech, have we? That's our
We
favourite
haven't even
subject.
gone to technology, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we've just about rewritten. I could just think of so many things we could do right now with everything that you pointed out. I'm like, okay, let's get working on this. Let's go and build a framework for this. Let's put this into every single hospital. How about this? Oh, I've got a system. Let's go, Taimi. Let's go. I'm just like, no, let's do this. Whatever we can do. I mean, my drama is prevention. I'm always like, how do we stop the cliff from even appearing? And if the cliff is there, how do we build a bridge before you get there?
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that I definitely feel a change in our education system is like long overdue, because we learn least how to drive this wonderful, beautiful thing that drives all of us. And we just don't know how to react or respond to our own central nervous system. It's just incredible. But if I said,
I wish for education.
oh yeah,
And probably
I've got a life mission. I'm just hoping that I can see something before I get to 90. I mean, I'm in my mid-50s now. I've got 45 years to go. No, sorry, 35 years. Holy
we'll
hell.
get there. We'll get there. There's going to be a radical shift. AI is going to do all the grunt work of tailoring academia, and the teachers are going to be tasked with doing the human stuff, teaching emotional regulation and how to stick your feet in the soil, and and play games and get motor skills and all those things, and build beautiful things.
Education's going to actually allow that though? Like I keep thinking,
I think it has to. We are no longer building people for the industrial age. We have to build our young people to be entrepreneurs, and nobody's teaching that right now. And that's, I guess, where AI is going to help tailor things, while humans do the stuff that we know is really important and leads to better mental health outcomes, and that's the connection stuff.
Well, the connection stuff, if you think about it, and you go back to even, our Polynesian kind of cultures, the waka and wahine paretu, like having the strong woman at the helm of the waka, I really think that, as we go to space, we're going to be driving all sorts of other ships, and they're going to require teams that are intuitive, because intuitive teams are the only way that things have worked, sensing, feeling, being. And somehow we've, in the age of technology, had a sensory shutdown, which is, again, where I have to agree with you that AI, the beauty of AI is it's going to replace all of these things. And again, we'll have that sensory capacity, because we can even see it in our younger populations now. Their sensory capacity is like almost zero, because everything is like this. And then their awareness and their emotional regulation, they're not actually perceiving those senses and not reaching anything else outside of one framework of technology to another. and they're even communicating with each other in the same room through tech. So the concern is what happens to feel or regulate past tech. And AI will, as you said, just take over some of that. Then the human connection, the village kind of feeling comes back again. That, okay, so we need to train ourselves to be able to use our senses in extreme environments, because that's what's going to be required of us. Yeah. And only human beings can do that.
It's irreplaceable by tech.
Yeah. So, if I ask you one final question, because I could ask you 10 more.
We'll have to do more of these, yeah.
We could solve the whole planet. So we've covered, a little bit around that sort of that community, the storytelling, some solutions that can be there, and I'm hoping that those that are in power that listen to things and listen to you can start to, evolve some of these systems as regular parts of what we can see and be accepted with. But legacy vision, collaborative impact, technology, where do you sit on the next 5 years of tech? And I think you've just touched on what we need to be doing together. But how do we need to responsibly use AI and tech to make way for better systems around mental health? What do you see as a responsible way for us to head forward?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think we have to remember that tech is a tool. It is not a replacement for human connection. It is a tool that we can use to make, I guess, the duller or more tedious parts of our lives a little bit easier. So when it comes into mental health, if we can use it to write our notes, if we can use it to bring our attention to things that we might not have picked up in a conversation, if we can use it out of hours for people to get the support they need in the language and the tone that they want when you don't have a person to reach out to. I think those are the really important things. But the other thing that I get really concerned about when I'm talking to those that build tech, and I play with it a little on the weekends, but that they find tech as the ultimate solution, but they're not building into it from the beginning all of the voices that we need to get heard and what that looks like. So we're not building into it the ability to reach those who are, digitally bereft, and we have a big digital determinant, really, in that we have some with and some without. So how do we reach those that have the without? How do we make sure that there is equity in the way that people access digital tech? Are we building in the voices of LGBTQIA+? Are we building in the voices of First Nations? Are we building in our cold communities' voices? Are we building in our disabled voices, our deaf voices, our blind voices, our autistic voices? How are we building tech in a way that is absolutely accessible for everyone, not just the few? That takes quite a lot of work. And I've worked a little bit on chatbots that people have bought who have kind of coded. And one of the things that I think we're getting better at now with the adjunct of large learning models and general intelligence, but we certainly were quite bad at it at the beginning, is that whenever someone decided that they wanted to talk to an avatar or tech or a chatbot, and then they felt like they could trust that bot enough to say that I was feeling suicidal, the tech would kick them off and say, oh no, I'm not a human, therefore this is at risk and you can't be on here. And yet that was inherently risky for people because they knew they were talking to a bot, but they trusted the bot not to call the cops or to lock them up or call hospital. They just wanted to work through their feelings in a way that they felt safe to go, and these are the darkest thoughts that I'm having, how do I get through that? So we have come a long way in trying to code those conversations to feel more empathetic, to feel more like a peer or a critical friend talking to you. But we still have to be really explicit that is a code, it is an algorithm that's learning how to fake empathy. It's not a real human. But a lot of people, and not just young people, are saying that platforms like ChatGPT and Claude are really helpful in the middle of the night, are really helpful in helping understand their feelings, in pulling out psychological practical models so that we can practice them in our own time at home. So I think we have to give permission for people to use those things, maybe be a little bit clearer on what the ethical constraints and the ethical boundaries of using those tools are. Otherwise, we have the strict ethical considerations of building a tool for mental health and then everyone else using ChatGPT. I think we have to be a little bit better at teaching our young people how to maybe code their own bot on ChatGPT so that they can build the guardrails in that they need to stay safe. and consider ethics and time and lived experience and all of the voices being represented in that way.
Interesting, because in using some of the AI that we've been using in our prevention-based tools and even in training young people and working with women, one of the things that comes back resoundingly is the language of companionship. So what ChatGPT or AI has been really good at being coded with has been companionship. We can do this together. You're doing okay. And it's a reassurance mechanism, and it's actually worked really well. And maybe that's a little bit of what we dump into it ourselves, because eventually whatever we're using starts to emulate the language that we have. And, I think about what we have now. And I know, I often will, my big driver, I think, as you know, Anil knows this as well, is that my own father, through the system, he had a series of heart attacks. This was a good 20 years ago. And because of those heart attacks, he then got diagnosed as being, he'd started speaking languages because he spoke 13 languages, and they put him straight into an asylum and he hung himself. And so that was in the space of 3 days, and me having to fight a junior psychologist and say, don't give him lithium. He's just had a heart attack. He doesn't need lithium right now. What he needs right now is he needs me to get there. And I was 7 months pregnant, and I was in New Zealand trying to get back over here. And, at the same time, my uncle was passing away and my whole family was taking care of him. So there was no one there for my dad, who was just going through this. They've just stripped all my clothes, and he was talking to me, and you could just see this man who had this incredible life was feeling like, and then they said, oh no, you've got this, and they diagnosed him with all these things. And in the end, his note to me was, I can't be a burden to you. So, and you kind of think that was in the space of 5 days. But those 5 days would have seemed like an endlessness to that person. To him, it was. But I look at the system now, and I look at the way we're using technology, and I think for people like him, in that, and I think this is where I also feel that we need to be educating our older population about how to use tech and how to use ChatGPT and how to find a way to get that
Imagine if he had been able to talk to ChatGPT and said, I'm a burden to my family, and have Chat come back and go, you're absolutely not. Look at the amazing things that you've done. This is just a phase that you're going through. I mean, this is what a critical friend would have done anyway, but it's what ChatGPT is. I'm sure it's saving lives in that preventive sense.
Well, as you've just said that, in educating some of the community that I've worked with to find a friendly way of having these conversations, that's what I found. I've even been teaching my mum how to do it and others, and just saying, how easy this is. Seeing populations that otherwise wouldn't. And hey, just have that conversation. If you don't know something, just ask. And quite often it's, they're really quite friendly. It's quite a friendly tool. It talks back to you, and it's just this nice, natural conversation. So I guess what I'm hearing from you is, again, and this has almost been a theme of our conversation, is somewhere we as human beings need that positive reassurance. And if it's coming through technology and we're shaping it that way, that's another wonderful asset that we have. And that in itself, I mean, a lot of people are saying there's a therapeutic outcome there, but it's more of the companionship. And so ways that we can find that companionship, because I think social media, we had the illusion it was companionship when it actually became another place of judgment, unfortunately. Yeah.
But I think you touched on the really important thing, and And if we can teach our different generations of all different ages how to use these large language models in a way that is ethical and safe and in a closed loop system, so we're not, sharing personal things to companies that can then make money from those. I think that's probably, if you're good at technology and you understand that, that's probably the one thing that you can pass on to others as a really good skill that's not that hard to learn, but will help people find solace and companionship in those moments where they don't know where to reach out and find that.
Taimi, lastly, is there a plan for, in South Australia at least, for you to start to form some kind of education in the community? Have you started to do that around the tools that are available and systems? Give us a little
Yeah,
snippet of what that is. Yeah.
So there's a program that I'm trying to bring over to from New Zealand at the moment, which hopefully we'll get across the line shortly, and that's mostly education program, but it's going out to communities and basically downloading everything that I know and think in a way, really, so that people feel the confidence and leadership to be able to advocate in the circles of influence that they have, and then from that knowledge go, what do I want to do with this knowledge? And from that program, we have seen some incredible things that we could never have dreamed of happening. I've trained police who have then gone back and twisted and shaped that training themselves to teach to other police, which means that now in undercover squads that there's no police shootings, because they're going in with a far more compassionate understanding of what that person's feeling on the other end rather than command and control. We've had someone open a string of LGBTQIA plus boxing gyms around the country so that rainbow communities and queer communities can learn how to defend themselves. We've had people write plays and tour the world with them. We've had journalists win awards. We've had politicians change policies. And the beautiful thing is that those who do the program, one, don't need to tell anyone else they do the program. So it's kind of like this silent guerrilla movement of change and advocacy, this social movement of knowing this group of other people that you can connect with, and they all talk to each other, but then whatever they decide to do with that knowledge is their own thing based on what it is that they know really well, whether it's opening a peer support group for young mums or being, one of them was an Uber driver who decided every conversation he was going to have in his Uber was going to be around mental health and get to know people. So these kind of knock-on effects of people being able to make system change is kind of what I'm hoping is going to creep into society over the next couple of years. So they may not ever know where it was seeded from, but we're all gaining the same knowledge and capacity to support ourselves and others. That's my hope.
Taimi, I'm going to have to say I could talk to you for days, which seems like a bit of a cliche, but I literally could. I love these ideas. I would embrace them totally. I'm looking forward to seeing what the tenure of your leadership is going to bring to South Australia. And in effect, I hope it's a positive virus and shared and collaborated with the other great commissioners that are out there, and that we start to see some of these changes and this advocacy in and embraced readily. If I were to take two clear messages from everything you've said, and that's acceptance and companionship. It really is that warm embrace of total acceptance and companionship, which I think is one of the first points of healing for anything. So I have enjoyed this so much. If there was one thing you wanted to leave everyone with, what would you like them to take away from you today?
This too will pass. If you're going through a tough time, it will pass, right? And every time you get to this moment where things are really hard, it will last a little bit less than the time it did before, and there'll be a bigger gap between the next time you hit it. So just knowing that you can kind of surf those waves rather than get smashed by them, I think is the thing. We all have to surf, no matter what part of life we're in. And if you're supporting a loved one surfing, it's about making sure you keep yourself afloat.
Fantastic. Thank you, Taimi. Till we meet again.
Lovely speaking.